Welcome everyone to this session. We want to look at the issues regarding capabilities of extension agents, extension personnel to transfer climate change adaptation technologies to farmers. We expect that this class should be able to equip every candidate with ideal knowledge regarding to climate change, issues around the concept of climate change. What does climate change mean? We look forward that everyone at the end of the class should do a self-appraisal on the climate change adaptation technologies that are available in agricultural extension. And then we also will look at extension capabilities for climate change adaptation. We are all familiar with issues relating to climate change. We also look at the constraints to acquisition of climate change capabilities for extension. There are issues that make it difficult for extension to acquire climate change capacity. So we'll look at those issues and then ways of acquiring these capacities. What do we look forward? How would extension go about acquiring the capacity to transfer climate change related matters? So we move from here to introduce climate change. Climate change refers to a statistically significant variation in either the mean state of the climate or in its variability, persisting for an extended period. Usually, we don't talk about climate change until we've done an analysis of data relating to weather for about 10 years. That is why most times climate change studies use what we call the time series analysis. Climate change may be due to natural process. It could be as a result of external forces or persistent atmospheric, challenges coming both from man and his use of environment, and then also sometimes coming through agriculture. We'll look at how agriculture has contributed to climate change as we go ahead. In Nigeria here, this country has been identified as one of the very major hotspots of climate change. And then there are cases of increase in drought, rising sea level, flooding. Of course, we experience some in some of our states and in some of our neighboring states. The instability in the patterns of rainfall and temperature is common in every region, especially the southeastern region. So consequently, this has left adverse effects on agriculture and posed serious threats to food security and livelihood. It has made it now very important that actions must be undertaken. And in undertaking these actions, the target is to check the devastating impacts of climate change on agriculture. So these actions that we take to moderate the effect of climate change are the things we call climate change adaptation. So climate change adaptation refers to changes in processes, practices, or structures to moderate or offset potential damages or to take advantages of opportunities associated with changes in the climate. Now, adaptation will imply building capacity in skills, in technology, building stronger institutions, and promoting social equity. Now, in Africa, farmers are not doing much, and then of course, they will need to be first aware of the adaptation techniques and processes before they can effectively implement them. This is where agricultural extension comes in. Remember, extension is there to introduce new ideas and new concepts to farmers. That is where extension comes in. So extension is there to bring that knowledge of climate change adaptation and mitigation to farmers. This class is going to look at the extent to which extension has the capacity to do it. What is extension doing? So let's look at climate change adaptation technologies and extension. Just as we've said earlier, it is expected that extension personnel should transfer climate change adaptation technologies to farmers. Some of these technologies for climate change adaptation that we expect extension to transfer will influence both livestock production and crop production, especially arable crops. Prominent among these technologies will include crop diversification, cultivation of new crop varieties. It will include cultivation of disease and drought resistant varieties. It will include use of organic manure. These are some of the climate change adaptation techniques and technologies that we expect agricultural extension to transmit to farmers. The developing countries seem to prioritize agricultural adaptation as a result of their growing vulnerability to climate change. So extension is expected to transfer these technologies. Remember, they will include, as we mentioned earlier on, diversification in cropping patterns, crop rotation, use of organic manure, use of disease tolerant crop varieties, integrated nutrient management, agroforestry, conservation tillage, mixed farming, change in planting dates, early warning system, climate insurance. We would expect that when you go to field to do your research work, some of you may say to check or assess the extent to which extension is doing this. But extension cannot do this if they don't have the capacity. Extension needs to be well equipped, with the capacity to execute these responsibilities. So let's discuss the capacity or the capabilities of agricultural extension for climate change adaptation. We will see, of course, we are all in the field, that the extent to which extension has been equipped to carry out this responsibility has not been so great. Extension capabilities in the area has barely gone beyond the traditional rules of agricultural innovation dissemination. Extension personnel should be encouraged in all means, by all means, while extension organization should undergo institutional changes in order to accommodate new challenges that are posed by climate change. The much extension seem to be doing now is still within the traditional roles. Although yes, we've seen improvements, we've seen advancements trying to play active role in climate change, but then extension personnel need to acquire new skills so that they can help farmers manage emerging climate change issues. The inadequacy of capacity for climate change adaptation among agricultural extension personnel in Africa is very obvious. So many studies have shown that the system has not adequately adjusted to address issues of climate change. Thus, for effective adaptation to climate change to occur, the capability of extension personnel should be adequate in order to address the emerging challenges. Some of the areas where we expect that agric extension should do more would require much doings in terms of use of weather forecasting equipment, understanding and communicating weather forecast, conducting of SPATs, the promoting environmentally friendly agricultural practices, use of ICTs in climate change adaptation. These are areas where extension is doing something, and then we expect extension to do more. Extension should be there to translate climate change information into practical guidance. Some of this climate change information do not, suit or align with the things that our farmers currently know or do. So it beholds on extension to transmit or to translate this information in a manner that it will be amenable, to be able to address the current situation of our farmers. Adapting foreign technologies to local conditions, promoting cultivation of improved crop varieties. These are things that we expect extension to, to work in. These are the capabilities we expect extension to work in as we address issues of climate change, mobilizing resources for adaptation, creating awareness, raising market intelligence, even conflict management. We know that the ongoing crisis between herders and farmers also has something to do with climate change. So extension can come in to assist in this direction. So how would extension be doing this? Let's look at ways. What would it imply? Ways. As we conclude this particular session, how would extension go about this? Extension will go about these issues we are discussing now to acquire capability to transfer climate change through local seminars, through routine in-house training. Pre-service training should be there, given that some of the some of the training we received on campus, while in school, may not strongly align to the demands of the changing climate. Essential personnel are expected to utilize diversified avenues for acquiring capability for climate change adaptation. This is normal, as every source has its strengths and weaknesses. So we need to see, how do we combine methods to create opportunities for improvement. However, it's also important the extension officer, the extension staff should personally see to him or herself what to do. Personal interaction with professional colleagues is important, and then there is the internet. It has become very important also in communication. If a station is able to use these tools, we can be very sure that climate change adaptation wouldn't be an issue for extension. We need to clearly state that the fact that extensions seem not to be doing as expected in Nigeria when it comes to climate change adaptation and mitigation does not mean that extension is not interested. There are certain challenges that extension is going through in Nigeria that is threatening this effort. So in this part of this lecture, we want to discuss constraints to acquisition of capacities, constraints to extension, as extension makes effort to transfer climate change adaptation technologies. Now, these constraints will include poor funding, inadequate manpower. Of course, we know that the farmer to extension ratio in Nigeria is abysmally low. Inadequate agricultural policies, there is the inadequacy of required equipment, then difficulty to secure the consent of farmers to start working with the extension in line with these changes. And then there is the corruption that has bedeviled the society, which cannot be overemphasized. So these things are the things that make it very difficult for extension to play the active role in climate change adaptation and mitigation. However, these constraints can be, many institutional and then maybe financial factors. For instance, we mentioned poor funding. Poor funding has been identified as one of the most serious challenges to effective agricultural extension service delivery in Nigeria. The funding of extension services in Nigeria has drastically reduced following the withdrawal of the World Bank assistance in 1996. You remember how we had this system before now, where the World Bank brought a good percentage of the funding, while the federal government and states did their own part in what was called a counterpart funding structure. But then, since World Bank withdrew in 1996, we have seen a significant fall in extension service performance. It's all over the place. Many state governments have proven incapable of funding extension services in Nigeria, and then this is likely to prolong and worsen the entire situation. The poor funding of extension has led to lack of logistics. It's difficult to now acquire mobility tools like vehicles, motorcycles for extension agents to reach out to farmers. Also, there is a decline of government spending on extension activities, and it's going to hinder extension roles in climate change adaptation and mitigation. Then we mentioned policy instabilities and inconsistency, and then the bureaucratic bottlenecks, which are also a serious challenge in this context. The Nigerian government have initiated several agricultural and ecological practices and programs, but they have not endured due to political instability. One government comes in, they decide to jettison whatever a previous government must have done, and then the whole policy starts all over. So you see that the most agricultural policy documents in Nigeria seem to focus majorly on crop production without accommodating issues around climate change. Of recent, we've seen the accelerated efforts by government to address climate change, though, especially in the agricultural sector. But then emphasis is not placed on improving the capability of extension personnel for climate change adaptation. And because of that, there is a wide gap. Another constraint that we need to look at before we end the class is the poor linkage among stakeholders in the agricultural innovation system, which has also delayed effective performance of extension and extension personnel in climate change adaptation in Nigeria. When you look at other countries like Sierra Leone, Liberia, you see that information on climate change adaptation are provided by extension personnel seem to be much more relevant than what we get here in Nigeria. This is not unconnected with the weak linkage in the innovation system. It suggests poor involvement of farmers in innovation creation, resulting in the development of innovations that do not address farmers' felt needs. Previously, we looked at the place of feedback in extension communication. Now, if we don't make adequate use of feedbacks from farmers, we will end up having innovations and ideas that do not address farmers' felt needs. In the previous class, when we looked at approaches to development, you recall we mentioned the bottom-top approach, where ideas and things that need to be done move from the people, from the beneficiaries, from the would-be user to the government. So in conclusion of this session, we want to clearly state that climate change has remained an important challenge to agricultural production, especially in developing countries, because of limited ability to adapt. It's becoming difficult, and there is so much room for improvement. It's good that we make the following important recommendations: that alternatives and sustainable funding approaches should be used for extension to adapt to the needs of climate change. It's also important that a robust policy framework should be developed and implemented for extension services. Agricultural extension policy and programs in the country should integrate climate change adaptations. A lot is currently ongoing in this area, and then what is more important for us is that these things be sustained. There is also the need for capacity building programs on agricultural adaptation to climate change, which will be mounted regularly by extension personnel, and then address emerging issues, a whole lot of emerging issues. Then also linkages between extension organizations and research institutes should be promoted to encourage exchange of information. So that's where we end this particular session. We look forward to having your responses on areas that you seek more clarifications, possibly during our physical meetings or using the other channels available. If you have any question, please, you can drop your questions now. We want to take your responses in this direction.